The sky over Japan was a perfect cloudless blue. It was the kind of morning that made you forget, just for a second, that the world was burning. Tsutomu Yamaguchi looked up. He heard the hum of a B-29 bomber. It wasn't a squadron. It was just a single plane, high above the city. A small speck against the azure canvas. It didn't look like a threat. It looked like a mistake. He watched two small parachutes drift down from the belly of the plane. They looked almost peaceful, floating on the wind. He didn't know that inside that falling silence was the power of the sun. He didn't know that in 3 seconds, the world he knew would cease to exist. If you want to hear more stories about the people who defied the odds of history, please take a moment to subscribe. The date was August 6, 1945. Hiroshima. Japan was crumbling. The Pacific War was in its final, bloodiest throes. Tsutomu was 29 years old. He was a naval engineer for Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, a man of blueprints and steel, not a soldier. He was a husband, a father to an infant son. For 3 months, he had been stuck in Hiroshima on a business trip, desperate to get back to his family in Nagasaki. That morning was supposed to be his ticket home. He had his train ticket in his pocket. He was walking toward the shipyard one last time to say goodbye to his colleagues. He was 3 kilometers from ground zero. He never heard the explosion. The universe simply turned white. It wasn't just light. It was a magnesium flare ignited inside his own eyes. A flash so intense it erased shadows, erased colors, erased the concept of morning. The heat hit him before the sound. A wave of thermal radiation traveling at the speed of light. It felt like a giant hand had shoved him into a furnace. He was lifted off his feet and thrown into a potato patch. The earth convulsed. He squeezed his eyes shut and covered his ears. The roar that followed was the sound of a city dying. According to his later accounts, he didn't know if he was dead or alive. He wrote, "I didn't know what had happened. I think I fainted for a while. When I opened my eyes, everything was dark, and I couldn't see much. It was like the start of a film at the cinema, before the picture has begun when the blank frames are just flashing up without any sound." The air was thick with dust. It was twilight at 9 in the morning. He touched his face. His skin felt raw, hot. His left side was badly burned. His hair was singed. He crawled out of the ditch. The shipyard was gone. The buildings were gone. In their place were twisted skeletons of steel. He started walking toward the center of the city. He had to find his colleagues. He had to get to the train station. The scenes he encountered were not from this earth. He saw people walking with their arms held out in front of them like sleepwalkers. Their skin hung from their fingertips in sheets, peeling away like the skin of a peach. They didn't scream. They didn't cry. The shock had robbed them of their voices. He found 2 of his co-workers, Akira and Kuniyoshi. They were alive, battered, burned, but alive. "Yamaguchi," Akira rasped, "you made it." "We have to move," Yamaguchi said. His voice was a dry croak. "The fire is coming." "Look at the river," Kuniyoshi pointed. The river was choked with bodies. People had fled to the water to escape the heat, and they had died there. The water was boiling. To get to the train station, they had to cross. The bridge was shattered. There was only one way across. They had to swim. Yamaguchi waded into the water. He pushed aside the floating corpses of men, women, and children. He tried not to look at their faces. He focused on the far bank. One stroke, then another. Every movement stretched his burned skin, sending jolts of agony through his nerves. He climbed up the other side, vomiting water and bile. They reached the station. Miraculously, a train was still running. It was the last train out of the apocalypse. It was packed with the burnt and the dying. The smell inside the carriage was the stench of roasted flesh. Yamaguchi squeezed in. He huddled in a corner, drifting in and out of consciousness. He gripped his ticket. It was the only thing that felt real. He arrived in Nagasaki the next morning. He stumbled to a hospital. The doctors wrapped him in bandages until he looked like a mummy. They treated his burns, but they couldn't explain what had happened. No one knew what an atomic bomb was. They just knew a new type of bomb had been used. He went home. His wife, Hisako, saw him approach the door. She froze. He was a monster of gauze and charred flesh. "Is that you?" she whispered. Her hands covered her mouth. "I'm home," he said. He collapsed. He should have stayed in bed. He should have rested. But Yamaguchi was a man of duty. The date was August 9th, 3 days after Hiroshima. Despite his fever, despite the pain that screamed in every inch of his body, he got up. He put on his work clothes over his bandages. He had to report to his supervisor. He had to tell the company what had happened to their shipyard. He walked to the Mitsubishi office in Nagasaki. The city was bustling. The air raid sirens had sounded earlier, but the all-clear had been given. It was another beautiful summer day. He walked into his boss's office. The supervisor looked at him with a mix of horror and skepticism. Yamaguchi began to explain. He talked about the single plane, the flash, the city that vanished in a heartbeat. His boss leaned back in his chair. He shook his head. "You're an engineer, Yamaguchi," the boss said. "Calculated. How could one single bomb destroy a whole city? You've been hit on the head." "One, it's the truth," Yamaguchi insisted. "The steel beams melted. The people vanished." "Two, you are hysterical," the boss replied. For at that exact moment, the room filled with a blinding white light. It was the same light, the same terrifying, silent flash. Yamaguchi knew what was coming. He dropped to the floor. "Get down!" he screamed. The shockwave hit the building. The windows exploded inward. Glass shards turned into shrapnel. The office walls buckled. The ceiling collapsed. Yamaguchi was thrown across the room. Debris rained down on him. The bandages on his body were ripped away by the force of the blast. Silence returned. He lay in the rubble. He checked his limbs. He was alive. Again. He crawled out of the ruined office. He looked out at Nagasaki. The mushroom cloud was rising, a monstrous pillar of gray and purple, churning into the stratosphere. He had been 3 kilometers from ground zero in Hiroshima. He was 3 kilometers from ground zero in Nagasaki. The demon had followed him home. He didn't think about his pain. He didn't think about the radiation that was currently shredding his DNA. He thought of his wife and son. He ran. He ran through the second apocalypse of his life. His house was near the epicenter. He scrambled over mountains of debris, passing familiar landmarks that were now just dust. He reached the place where his home used to be. The house was flattened. It was a pile of timber and tile. He fell to his knees. "Hisako!" he screamed. "Katsutoshi!" There was no answer. He dug at the rubble with his bleeding hands. He pulled away a beam, then another. He prepared himself to find their bodies. Then a voice. "Tsutomu!" He spun around. Emerging from a nearby shelter was his wife. she was holding their son. They were covered in dust, but they were alive. "I thought you were dead," he wept. "We went to the tunnel," she said. "We were looking for ointment for your burns. If you hadn't been hurt in Hiroshima, we would have been in the house." The irony washed over him. The first bomb had burned him, but those burns had saved his family from the second bomb. They spent the next week in a shelter near the ruins. Yamaguchi's hair began to fall out in clumps. His gums bled. He vomited constantly. The radiation poisoning had set in. His arm turned gangrenous. He watched his family starve as they waited for help that wouldn't come. He wrote in his diary, "I had no feeling left. I was not sad. I was not happy. I was just empty. I looked at the sky and waited for the next sun to fall." But the third sun never fell. On August 15th, Emperor Hirohito's voice crackled over the radio. Japan had surrendered. The war was over. Yamaguchi survived. The radiation took his hair. It took his health for years. It took his hearing in one ear. But it did not take his life. He raised his family. He went back to work for Mitsubishi. He became a translator. For decades, he didn't speak about what happened. He just wanted to be normal. He wanted to forget the white light. It wasn't until he was an old man in his 80s that he began to speak. He realized that as the survivors died out, the world would forget the horror. He wrote books. He gave speeches. He traveled to the United Nations. "The reason I hate the atomic bomb," he told a reporter, "is because of what it does to the dignity of human beings." In 2009, the Japanese government officially recognized him as a Niju Hibakusha, a double bomb survivor. He is the only person officially recognized to have been in the blast zones of both Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Some historians estimate that perhaps 160 other people experienced both bombings, fleeing one city only to be trapped in the other. But Yamaguchi was the voice of them all. He died in 2010, at the age of 93, a man who stood at the center of 2 nuclear explosions, a man who was told by the universe that it was his time to die, twice, and simply refused. War creates victims. It creates statistics. But occasionally, it reveals a spirit that cannot be extinguished by fire or physics. If you believe these stories need to be remembered, join us. There are more voices waiting to be heard. Tsutomu Yamaguchi saw the end of the world. And then he walked out of the ashes to tell us that we must never, ever let it happen again.